How exciting is this? I've waited since I was 10 years old to do this.
Well, sit on this stage.
to grill you in this way. Are you guys excited for this?
Hold on, I've just got to adjust the hearing aids.
Yes.
You're too loud.
Oh, I know. You want me to bring it down? I said
it's
to
like
bring it
being
up.
back with Entwistle. Hold up. That's better.
You know, I've got ringing in my ears as well. I went to a Lou Reed concert, and my ears rang and then never stopped for the last 25 years.
Lou Reed did that?
Yeah, Lou Reed, and I saw him somewhere, and I said to him, I saw you, and my ears have rung for 25 years, thinking he'd laugh, and he just looked at me.
Yeah, that was Lou. that was Lou.
He was not amused. Well, the book is fantastic. So congratulations for writing.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I assume everybody here got the book. That's part of it. You haven't read it yet, but I have, and it was really fun to just hear your point of view about everything. Did you enjoy looking back and writing the book?
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't do a book deal. I didn't know if I had a good book in me, and all I wanted was a good book. And if it hadn't been a good book, I wouldn't have gone to a publisher with it. So what I did, I worked with a friend who's a journalist who had done an article on me. He came to one of the days when I was working on the Teenage Cancer Trust shows that I do every year in England. Thank you. And he followed me around for the day and shadowed me. And he wrote this article in the Sunday Times. And I'm having Sunday breakfast, and Heather, my wife, falls on the floor laughing. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "I'm just reading this article on you by this guy called Matt Rudd, and he totally gets you." And it was a very funny article because he just had a sense of humour the way he wrote.
What was his take on you?
I'm completely mad. With my Nokia, I won't have an iPhone, so I still have my old Steam phone.
Yeah.
And it was taking me 10 minutes to do a 3-line text. But that's me. I just refuse to have an iPhone. I find them sucking up your life. Yeah. Like a vacuum cleaner, and it disappears into this thing, and people are spending their lives looking down instead of up.
And they found a way to suck all of your royalties away.
Well, yeah, the internet, I've never been very pro it. It's useful in its ways, but seems to be bringing out a lot of bad in people.
Yeah. Me at 2 in the morning.
When people learn... When people learn to manipulate it, and no names mentioned, but they control your lives, and they become hooked on it, and it becomes an incredible addiction. So I've avoided all that, and I have my Steam phone. I'm very, very happy with it. But Matt got it. Anyway, I just said to Matt, "Would you like to work with me to see if I have a book in me?" And he said, "Sure, I'd like to do that." And so I did a deal with him, paid him a fee.
How much did you pay him?
£2.65 over a period of years.
Yeah.
No, he did interview after interview after interview for about 4 years. He even did an interview with me when I was in hospital with meningitis, when I didn't think I was coming back. He thought, you better get one last one in. Yeah.
Matt sounds very aggressive.
No, Matt is wonderful. Yeah. But anyway, and we pieced together, he wrote the interviews down exactly how I said them. And then, of course, speech isn't grammar. Mm-hmm. So I had to kind of write over it and rejig it so that instead of it being a series of events that are just random and all over the place, you have to kind of give it a thread. I kind of found that. And then I just put it out to publishers. And because I did it the way I did it, I could insist on the title, which the publishers kind of fought against. You know, I don't know why, but they seem to think every biography just needs to be called the name of the person with the face of the person on the cover. And I just feel that book covers can be much more. You know, a good picture can tell a story. So I designed the cover with Richard Evans, who runs our website. It was my idea. He helped me with the print. And I insisted on the title because I just think it's intriguing. And if you've got an intriguing title, you might interest people that know nothing about The Who, you know, and go, well, that just interests me. Who the fuck is Mr. Kibblewhite?
Yes. Well, please tell the story about the man mentioned in the title. Because what I found so fascinating in the beginning of the book is just how you grew up in post-World War II England and what that experience was like and how it shaped you.
Well, yeah, one of the kind of hard things to do through our whole career is to get Americans to kind of, apart from some Americans our age who you know, went to London in those early years and kind of saw it, is to kind of get any idea of what we grew up in. You know, I was born, my mother started to go into labour on the 29th of February, 1944. And although the big blitz of the bombers in the East End of London, which were the docks area where they flattened it, that had disappeared, that had gone. In the area we lived, which was West London, there were lots of arms factories. And by now, Hitler had designed the V1 bomb, which used to just come over, making this thudding noise, and which would then stop. And then before you knew it, there'd be 2 tons of high explosives falling on your head. Mm-hmm. So my mother went into labour during one of those raids, and she was determined that I wouldn't be born on the 29th of February. So, good, well done, Mum. She hung on till after the air raid was over.
Because she didn't want you born on a leap day.
I would have been 18 years old. I mean, I don't think people quite would have believed that, but there you go.
I like that during World War II, that's what your mom was thinking about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary. That's what they were like. And, but so, you know, just imagine what our parents went through. My dad was in the army. He got off the landing craft on D-Day, immediately blown up by a mortar bomb. Yeah. Fortunately survived. He had the shrapnel in him till the day he died. But they were terribly traumatized by the war. You've got to remember your 9/11 event, how it traumatized you, how you sat there, and that hopelessness, that, you know, that feeling in the gut that it did, to the world, by the way, not just to you, but your first experience. Our parents, both Pete's parents and my parents, John's parents, they were going through that kind of event every night for 5 years, 4 years, 5 years, because we were being bombed for that long. And you go on down into the shelter and you come up, and maybe the end of, you know, or your house wasn't there. My mother came out of the shelter and both ends of the street had disappeared. Just gone, flattened. So you can only just imagine what that must have done to the way they were in their lives. And it was only later on in my life I realised that they were probably shell-shocked for their whole life. Every time there was a thunderstorm, it would be, my mum would scream like a banshee, run on the kitchen table. And how did that was back in the bombing?
How did that change, you know, how you think they parented you, or just how they felt about you running around?
It created a kind of silent, loving, incredibly loving, but there was a distance. I found it with my parents, and a lot of people I talked to found it with theirs, and we've all come to the same conclusion. They'd all been through the same trauma. So anyway, but when we grew up, we had very little food. During the war was rationed, as you know. £1.25 pound of meat was the ration for a family of 4 for a week.
I just had that at the Palm earlier today.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was a family of 4's meat for a week during the war. And when we got to 1945, we then had to share that ration that we had with the German people, who were in even worse straits than we were. And in 1945, half of our loaf of white bread was made of chalk to pad it out. And that's why a lot of my generation are very short, and I've always blamed Hitler for my legs. Because these fucking legs wouldn't stop a pig in a passage.
But it seems like throughout the book, like one running idea throughout the entire book is how much you appreciated your success and how responsible you were to keep it going even during difficult times or difficult times with the members of the band, that you just had this work ethic that came from growing up like that.
Yeah, well, we grew up with nothing, anything we wanted. People say we were poor. We were not poor. We were incredibly wealthy because the war had brought families very, very close together, and they were big family units in those days. There was less movement. It was, the workforce was far less mobile than it is today. So there was incredible community, and the streets all in together. And one thing that got people through the war was singing.
Yeah.
Which Hitler could never work out. The more he bombed us, the more we sung. The louder we sung. And so after the war, that singing carried on. There was singing everywhere. Every factory you go past, the workers would be singing. The builders on the street would be singing. And it was very much the same up until kind of the early 80s. And then, of course, the new romantics came in and killed it dead. and when you listen to that music, it's understandable.
And so you say in the book that you went to...
But anyway, but what it gave us is that it gave us this ambition and this willing to strive for what you wanted. My first guitar, I couldn't afford to buy it, so I made it. Keith Richards made his first guitar. Quite a few other people from our generation made their first instruments because to buy one was impossible. Yeah.
And you said it was a terrible guitar.
Yeah, it was a terrible guitar, but it worked. It's really strange. As long as the bit from there to there is from there to there, you've got 6 strings, and you learn to tune it. The intonation of it it's not really important until you get up high. And all we needed in those days to play the music that inspired us, which was the music of Lead Belly and all those early American blues singers. They were a lot of chain gang songs, which kind of spoke to the working class of Britain. You could learn the 3 chords that you could play most of those songs. So immediately you could start a band. Yeah. You get a tea chest, which was a 2'6" box of plywood with an open bottom. You put a string through the middle and a broomstick and a piece of string as the one string on it. But a good player could make that sound like a double bass. No, I'm serious. It can still sound like an amazing instrument. So we're basically like jug bands and whatever you call them over here, And every street had a band and with people singing. So that was it taught us to do stuff for ourselves and not have it given to us. And the less that was given to us, the more we did for ourselves, and that made it more creative.
Doesn't it seem like a miracle it all worked out?
It's extraordinary. I mean, when you look at the bands that came out of that period, and I do have to say, Elvis was, and Little Richard and Jerry Lee and all those great guys were coming to us through our 10-minute slot that the BBC allowed us because this music was dangerous.
Yeah.
They didn't want us to have too much of it.
When would that be on? So it's 10 minutes?
I don't know. It'd be hidden away on a Saturday night or a Sunday night somewhere. But we managed to find it. And, of course, when everybody saw Elvis, even my age, and I was about 10 or 11, immediately it was going out to get the soap to slick the hair back. We couldn't afford Brill Cream or any of those, hair products, but the soap worked wonders. You could slick your hair back and it would stay there. And of course, we all thought we all looked like Elvis with our soapy hair until it rained. And. No, it was really great times. But then we saw this guy called Lonnie Donegan, and he was singing all this Lead Belly stuff and early American folk songs in a way that was primal. And he was really square, really, because he used to sing in a dinner jacket and a bow tie. But it was the way he sang.
Yeah. How did he sing?
He not only influenced me, he was fearless.
Give us a little Lonnie Donegan.
A little Lonnie, well, he started a song, for instance, ham and eggs, pork and beans, could have more boys, but that cook was so mean. They were kind of chain gang songs. But then he'd get halfway through it, and he'd go, ham and eggs, and he'd start to wail. And often he'd sling his head back and he'd wail. And it touched me in a way that Elvis didn't.
Yeah.
Elvis looked great, but Lonnie had a primal thing in him that I thought, I'm going to do this. This is good. This is good.
Did you have a vision that it was possible to really do it?
Robert Plant got his whole thing from Lonnie Donegan.
But did you when you first thought, I'm going to do this, did you have any real vision that it was possible to get outside of your small town doing it?
No. You do what you do, and I got up on stage at the local youth club, did my version of Hound Dog and Midnight Special, and all of a sudden there were a row of girls down the front. I thought, this is a good job. I was 11 years old, didn't quite understand what that was, but you understand that there's something about singing that it attracts friends.
Yeah.
And I'd always felt more comfortable on stage than in the audience.
Yeah.
So that was the start of it. And then I started a skiffle band like every street had. Later on, when I started to work in a factory, I made my first electric guitar. And going home from work one night, I bumped into a guy who made his first bass guitar, and that was John Entwistle. And he had this... He had his homemade bass, which was extraordinary looking, and even till the day he died, he used to play these extraordinary looking basses. John always insisted on having a neck that kind of went... I wonder if there was anything else about John that we didn't know.
He had big neck energy.
Yes, yeah, very big neck energy. Anyway, and I managed to talk him into joining my band by telling him that we were getting paid, which was we'd been paid once, not a lot, but we had been paid. It wasn't quite a lie, but it wasn't quite the truth. We weren't getting paid regular. And he came along and he started to play with me, and I thought, yeah, this guy's great. He was very clever. And he played trad in a trad band, which was his main job, but he was learning the bass, and he was obviously going to be quite good. And at that time, we had a rhythm guitarist who was not very good. I was the lead guitarist, and the rhythm guitarist had the amp. The one amp that both John and me and the rhythm guitarist had to go through.
So he stayed for a while. He had to stay.
So we couldn't afford to get rid of the rhythm guitarist. But after 6 weeks of putting up with this, John said to me, he said, I don't know whether I can go on with Reg playing this rhythm guitar. He said, I've got a friend that would suit us much better. Do you mind if I bring him along and give him a try? So anyway, I had a serious talk with Reg. And to his credit, Reg, our rhythm guitarist, loaned us the amp and gave up the rhythm guitar, which was a relief. And
because he was sure you were going nowhere.
He was sure we were going nowhere, but he had the amp. And then John brought this guy along, who I'd seen at school, because you could hardly hide him in a crowd of 1,000, or even 100,000, because in those days we were all incredibly skinny, and I said it, and I don't mean it as an insult, but in those days, Pete really was a nose on a stick. No, but I mean, I love Pete. I love Pete's head. I think he's got a fabulous head. If I was, no, he has, and he's grown into his nose. But in those days,
he's filled out.
And I'm really not being insulting here. I'm just trying to give you a picture of why you could not miss him. And John was very similar. John had a very strange walk. He kind of walked like John Wayne. He kind of, this leg that kind of went across. And he always used to be, for some reason or other, he used to be scratching his nose. You know, he had a kind of strange hand movement where he'd have his little finger used to go way back. I can't even do it. But John had very long fingers, and he would kind of, with this strange walk. So you just couldn't, again, you couldn't miss him. Anyway, he brings this guy along with another handmade guitar, but it had a machine-made neck. Mm-hmm. Where the body had gone, I never bothered to ask. And it was Pete Townsend. Yeah. And immediately it was quite obvious that this was a budding genius. On the guitar, he was playing chord shapes that we'd never seen before. Not even on the professional guys on the TV. He was playing all these diminished things. I don't know what they're called now even. These shapes that you could only go, what is he doing? And his rhythm action was so different than anything else. And I think that came from because in the trad band, he was playing banjo. Mm-hmm. So, yes, this rhythm guitarist, Johnny, is fantastic. Do you want to join the band? And Pete joined the band. So there we are, the three of us. We had a drummer. I'm playing lead guitar. Pete's on rhythm guitar. John's on bass guitar. And my oldest friend from first day at school, Harry Wilson, is on the drums.
How old are you at this time?
Can you answer that?
That's one of the guys you kicked out of the band. He's furious. But how old were you at this moment?
We're all. I was, I think, just turned 16, and they were just turning 15.
Crazy.
Yeah, and we were very, very young.
Was Pete popular in high school?
Pete?
Yeah.
I think, you know, I was because I'm small. I was bullied at the grammar school, quite badly bullied. And I'm sure Pete, because of the way he looked, I'm sure he didn't have an easy time either. You know, at that age, all boys school can be quite cruel, as you know. So I'm sure Pete didn't. John was a big lump. So, I don't think anyone would have argued with John, but I'm sure Pete might have been bullied. Yeah. I know I was.
Because you said you went to a good school for a while, and then your dad got a new job, and he was doing better. You went to a nicer neighborhood, and at the new school, it all went downhill.
It was the nice neighborhood that killed me. Never moved to a nice neighborhood.
Did you say you broke your jaw right before starting the new school?
No, I broke my jaw when I was about eight years old. Oh. I was just playing on a building site, and in those days, no such thing as all, you know, anyone keeping anybody up for anything. We used to play on bomb sites. Yeah. We used to find bits of bombs, you know, and remember finding the tail end of a bomb once. You've never seen 10 kids run faster in all your life. So there was no safety things or anything, and we were running around on this building site, and a bricklayer had left one of his lines out for the night, and over I went, smashed my jaw, which I didn't realise was even broken till about a week later, which is all in the book. You can read about all that. But so I was kind of a funny-looking bloke. I still am, but then really funny-looking bloke. And they gave me some very cruel names.
Like?
Well, all of them. Well, one of them was called Trog, which was kind of troglodyte, and if you look that up in the dictionary, it's not very flattering, to say the least.
But scientific.
Very scientific. Anthropological, is that the word?
It's a very advanced kind of hazing to call someone a drug.
So, you know, that was our years. And then we just progressed as this band, playing pop music of the day, playing clubs and pubs. But then we got lucky, and Betty Townsend, Pete's mother, was instrumental to the success of the band in the early days. She managed to get us gigs and an agent who got us better kind of places to play.
Because they were in the music industry, his parents?
She was a singer in a band, and Pete's father was a saxophonist in a RAF band, Royal Air Force band, called the Squadronaires during the war. So he's a very accomplished musician. Anyway, Betty Townsend, she managed to get us an agent who then booked us into an officers' club for the American Army in Bayswater in London, which was quite upmarket. And we used to play there every Sunday afternoon, called Douglas House. And of course, we came into contact with all these GIs. And they would start requesting music that we'd never heard before, you know, stuff like the blues, stuff like Johnny Cash, and you know, Chuck Berry, all this material. And of course, you'd be expected the next week to play at least one of them. So that started our musical journey into other music than was in the hit parade at the time. We had another singer with us at that time who used to think he was Cliff Richard. And he used to do all the Cliff Richard songs. And I used to sing all the other songs. I would do the Roy Orbison. I would do the Johnny Cash for all the people who wanted Johnny Cash in the club. And so that's how it worked. And we went on like that for, it always seems like longer than it actually was. When I look back, it was probably only about a year. We switched drummers. Harry wasn't quite up to it, and we found another drummer called Doug Sandon who joined. He was better. So that was a step forward. But then we saw a group called Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, which was a three-piece. There was just a lead guitar, a bass guitar, a drummer, and a singer. And all of a sudden, something clicked. We supported them at a youth club thing that we used to play every Sunday. It wasn't quite youth club, it was a bit upmarket than that. And there was something about the way Johnny Kidd did it that inspired Pete there was a guitarist called Mick Green, and he played in a way where he was playing rhythm and lead at the same time. And it was obviously so much better than having a rhythm guitar going jingy, 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 jing somewhere in the mix. It became rawer, became more dangerous. And Johnny Kidd with his leather trousers and a patch over one eye and a banana down the front. You know, he knew the business. Yeah. So immediately we thought, well, we need a singer. And my lead guitar by this time, because of the sheet metal work and guitar playing, don't really mix. You know, my hands were becoming harder and harder from the scar tissue, full of cuts. So I was very happy to give up the lead guitar, get fed up with with hands being wrecked. So we became a three-piece. We became a Johnny Kidd-alike band, doing all the songs he did, which was Shaking All Over, you know, Need a Shot of Rhythm and Blues, which the Beatles covered. You know, the very big influence on us. And that went on and on and on. And then we started to get into the blues, which Pete heard, from his friend at art school, a guy called Tom Wright, a dear friend of ours, who had an amazing collection of John Lee Hooker and Howlin' Wolf, Jimmy Reed, all those people we were introduced to. And Pete wanted to immediately for us to become a blues band. And I thought, well, if we do that with the audience we had, which were kind of, they wanted their night out. They didn't want to be played a lot of strange music.
They didn't want to be depressed.
If we do that overnight, we'll lose our audience. So, you know, there was a bit of argy-bargy between Pete and I. But slowly but surely, we became a blues band, just like the Rolling Stones, and became like all those bands in those years, you know, a Stones alike. Mm-hmm. And then we found a manager, a guy called Peter Meaden, who had been involved with publicising the Stones. And he thought we had something special. We certainly had. By this time, by the way, we found this strange drummer. And I can't... yes. And I can't tell you how strange he was. They don't come with any more strange than Keith Moon. It's impossible to describe to anyone who didn't know him and didn't spend a lot of time with him, through the good times and the bad, what Keith Moon was like. He was an extraordinary character. And when he joined the band and started playing with us that first night at the first audition, I knew that something big would happen. There was something about our biorhythms that locked together. Pete, John and myself had it, but we could never find that missing drummer, that missing piece. But when Keith joined, he was the key that started the engine. And it just, boom, it was perfect. And the algorithm that became the rhythm of the Who was formed.
And when did you know? So he comes into your auditions at the end of a gig, like you have a gig, and then he comes after you're done. And
no, he came halfway through.
Halfway through. Yeah. So in the middle of a show, you're like, you want to do one with us?
Yeah, you know. In the middle of the show, he came up and said, I can play much better than that drummer. He was a cocky little son.
Yeah. And you hired him that night? And then...
No, we didn't hire him that night. But we kind of thought, we'd better try him out at the rehearsal. It was quite obvious that he was going to be the one. He said he was never asked to join the band. And perhaps he wasn't. We didn't need to ask him. We invited him to the rehearsal and said, would you like to do the next gig? So I reckon that's pretty much him being invited to join the band. But I'm trying to make a film of him at the moment, but I'm determined not to make a biopic. Keith Moon deserves a proper film, and it has to be a film. Yeah. I don't want to do Carry On Keith, because Keith's personality was so enormous. Every facet of his personality was enormous. He could be the most generous, the most mean, the most caring, the most uncaring, the most loving, the most hateful, the most spiteful.
How did you learn that, though? Like, he joins the band, you probably think, he seems like a nice guy, and then slowly you go, oh, he's like this guy.
No, but he was a wonderful guy. He was the funniest man that I've ever met in my life. He was one of the few people in the world that could make Peter Sellers laugh. Peter Sellers just loved Keith because he could have him belly laughing. Keith could have you belly laughing until you had to leave the room because you were aching so much from laughing. Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever had that in your life, but I'm not kidding you, it really hurts. Yeah. When you really can't laugh anymore. And you're starting to cramp up from it. But when Keith would get on a soliloquy, he'd go off, and it would just, he had a vocabulary way beyond his education, and he could pull it out of the air with subjects that went off at tangents. You know, absolutely extraordinary stuff.
Where did his personality come from? What do you think was the root of what made him that type of guy?
Depends what drug he was on. I don't know. Apparently his mum said he was a normal child. Dear Kit Moon, what a sweetheart she is. I doubt if Keith was ever normal. His school report, I can't remember what it said, but it wasn't very glowing, a bit like mine. But you know, what a one-off. And if I ever do allow my picture to ever be made of him, I guarantee you it'll be something you're not expecting rather than what you are.
Yeah. And what was that scene like in London in 62, 63, right when you had your first singles and the Beatles were around and the Rolling Stones and the Kinks? Like, was it a community? Did you guys do, shows together? Was there camaraderie?
Yeah, I mean, the Beatles would have, Love Me Do was the record that really was the ignition of the swinging 60s. The sound of Love Me Do grabbed us all. What's this? And then, of course, the Stones came with Come On, Chuck Berry's song, and they looked very different than the Beatles. But then this movement started up, which Peter Meaden, this new manager we've got, talked us into becoming the figureheads for, which was the mob movement in London. And they all rode scooters, and they all dressed in trendy clothes.
Several mods out there.
Yeah, several mods out there. And of course, I was really a teddy boy, you know, which was not even a rocker. That was the Teddy Boys previous were they wore a Wardian dress, long draped fingertip jackets and velvet collars, kind of smart. I liked the mod thing when it started because that was smart too. It slowly very quickly turned into a kind of mess. But in the early days, it was smart. And anyway, Peter Meaden took this long-haired Rolling Stones-alike band into the barber shop, and we walked out of the barber shop. Having walked in as The Who, we walked out of the barber shop as the mod band called the High Numbers, with these very short haircuts, looking very different indeed, but of course inside exactly the same.
And what did the phrase "high numbers" mean?
Well, High Numbers was it came from a thing that was going on at the time. For about a month there, it became very trendy to wear bowling shoes on the street. And of course, there's this saying about the size of the feet. So the number on the back, needless to say, I was wearing shoes that were far too big for me.
And so he created an image for you guys in the beginning, and then you were doing your first singles.
Yes, and Pete wrote Can't Explain, which again was a kind of tribute to the Kinks. And you've got to remember, in the process leading up to this period, we'd supported every one of those bands. We'd supported the Beatles in Blackpool. We supported the Rolling Stones a few times. We supported the Kinks a few times. And every band that was out there, Jerry and the Pacemakers, you name it, Dusty Springfield, we've been on the same stage, but as the support act.
Yeah.
So we were kind of cutting our teeth in a pretty good way. But then, once Pete wrote Can't Explain, it was quite obvious that he was writing songs from a different perspective than all these others. He was writing, they were writing music for girls. Pete was writing music for blokes. Yeah. He was, and I think back at it, and I do say this thing, you know, that everyone else was doing rock and roll was music to make love to. Well, rock, which what the Who was doing and still does, was music to fight to. and Pete understood that, and so he's writing these songs for my generation anyway, and anywhere. It's got kind of arrogance about it that isn't there in rock and roll, and the beat is on the one, you know, because instead of it going, you get the gist.
Yes. Well, it was very angsty at a time when music wasn't angsty. I mean, he was talking about being a teenager.
I mean, and quite an obvious... I recognised his talent very, very early on. And I was just happy to be the guy that was lucky enough to be in that position on a stage that was presented with these songs to present to an audience for the first time. How lucky was I?
Yeah. What did you make of the songwriting when you first got a sense, when he's writing songs like Pictures of Lily,
that was a difficult
I'm a Boy, and I mean, it was very different than what anyone was writing.
Yeah, I did have, that's when I kind of had to really get to grips with Pete and I, our relationship as such. Because prior to that, it had been easy. It was kind of blues, it was aggressive, it was easy. And I could sing it in much more of my natural voice from a point of view that I understood really easily. When he started, then he presented Happy Jack. And this is, you know, how do I get to grips? Where's this coming from? So I had to learn then to really gain an empathy for Pete's interior motive of writing these songs and what he was going through inside and feeling and all those. So I had to kind of climb into Pete in a way.
Yeah. But what was he going through, though? What do you think it was that he was struggling with that made him write that type of music at the time?
I just think he had this imagination that was so wild. And, you know, if you read anything about Pete, you know, he had quite a lot of abuse when he was young. And like I say, I think he was probably bullied at school. And he is incredibly intelligent. He has a mind that goes off at tangents all the time with 25 thoughts at once. And he's incredibly vulnerable at times, but he likes to put that right in front of himself, which is incredibly courageous. So, you know, things like I'm a Boy, I had to climb inside that, and I really struggled to find the voice. But when I listen back to it now, it's kind of interesting because it's haunted. There's a haunted quality about it. You really do feel that you're this boy trying to say, but Mum, I'm a boy, you know, not a girl.
And that was the issues. No one was talking about that back then.
There's a quality to my voice that I was obviously mentally trying to tune into where Pete was when he wrote that. And then Tommy happened, and I can see for miles that those things happened, but then Tommy. And then that gave me the vehicle to kind of develop the voice that I ended up with. Because it was a joy to sing that. And on stage live, it was so different from the record. But it didn't matter. It gave us freedom to explore. And we were, by that period of our career, we'd started to like each other again.
Because you had what I thought was interesting was that you were the only person in the band who wasn't imbibing in partying and drinking and drugging, and you were the person keeping the trains on time. And so in the book you talk about flushing their stash down the toilet.
Yeah.
And they fired you, and then when you joined the band again after they took you back, you say that they were mean to you for years as a result of this.
Well, it was really a feud, myself, Keith and John. And John had a kind of side of him. He could be quite spiteful, and I loved John, but he had this side of him that was dark. And but anyway, the reason I flashed their stash was that we did our first tour of Europe, and they managed to get a hold of this bag of amphetamine tablets, which, you know, I tried them early on in our career when we were doing 2 shows a night. You know, we worked from 8 to 11 at night. This is after a day in the factory, by the way. And then from 2 in the morning till 5 in the morning the next day. So it's quite a long day. Yeah. And I tried doing it because, you know, just to help me stay awake. And all it did was dry me up, and I couldn't sing. And all I ever wanted to do was be a good singer and deliver a good show. And I'll tell you the reason for that. And the reason for that was I went to see Cliff Richard and the Shadows at the Chiswick Empire in 1962. And I remember how many Saturday mornings I had to work to pay for those tickets. And if Cliff Richard and the Shadows had been shit that night, God help them. But really, and I really realised then that you as the person on the stage, you owe it to an audience to turn up. You do not ever dial it in. And what these pills were doing, because the band could take them, they were just playing instruments, they were starting to speed the music up. And they were starting to make the music louder, and in those days we had no monitors, so it was very rarely I heard myself singing. And by the end of this kind of, I think it was about 5 or 6 shows in Europe, they were not only taking 1 pill before the show, they were taking, God, I don't know how many, but we ended up at a show where I could not get the words of the songs in. people trying to put us down. And it was ridiculous, and it was so loud, and I'm listening. I've spent 4 years managing the chemistry of this band somehow from the universe has been given to me, and I'm listening to this stuff falling apart at the seams, and I think this has to stop because they're too good for this. They're far too good for this. So while they're busy gleefully smashing up the equipment at the end of the show, I go off the stage and I find Keith's stash in his suitcase and flush it. And he comes off the stage immediately. Why he needs another pill, I don't know. Immediately looking for the stash, which is now gone. And he says, "Where's my stash gone?" And I said, "Well, it's down the toilet." And he attacked me with a tambourine. which sounds very gentle, isn't it? You come...
Oh.
Yeah.
It's like razors, right?
No, well, yeah, he didn't attack me with the skin of the tambourine. He attacked me slashing with the bells. Yeah. Needless to say, he didn't get very far. And I was thrown out of the band for fighting. And I was out of the band for about 4 weeks, and they did a few shows without me.
Who sang?
Huh?
Who sang in those weeks?
I don't know. I don't really care. You'd have to ask them. I've never asked Pete about it. I've never talked to them about it. Who sang? I really didn't give a shit.
But you were talking about starting your own band.
Yeah, well,
that
was how it was then. I thought, well, I've started this band. I'll start another one. Yeah. By now, I knew I could sing. We'd had hit records. I had a following. I knew my voice was doing something. And if it was to be in a band that had potential but were throwing it all away because of this silly bag of amphetamine, I don't want to be in that band anyway. So anyway, after a month, the management come knocking at the door, and they'd had a talk with the band and told the band, "You're not working without Roger. It's just not happening." Apparently they'd been booed off. So it's only what I've heard. That might not be true, but I've heard that. And anyway, the management came to me and they said, "We've talked to the boys, and they've agreed to take you back if you promise not to fight." So I thought, okay. I said, "Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll go back and I'll promise not to fight again, but they have to promise not to do any drugs before a show. I don't care what they do after a show, but before we go on stage, they go on stage straight." And they lived up to their half of it, and I lived up to my part of it. But for those 2 or 3 years after that, because Keith and John knew that I promised not to fight, but they knew my red mist and how it could come down. And, ooh, you don't want to see it. It's not very nice. They would do everything they could to antagonise me, and it was, yeah. But I used to just think of myself as a duck, and I would just let it roll off my back, and I would just.
Did it make you feel isolated in the band that they wanted to party like that?
I've been isolated all my life. It didn't bother me. I've always wanted to be the dog and never one of the sheep.
Yeah.
So never bothered.
But were they like bonded in a way that you weren't?
Once the drugs kicked in the whole of the business, I felt isolated because I didn't do it. I didn't do any of that.
That's why you look like that.
I must be the only rock star in the world.
That's why you were able to look like that. They didn't look like that.
Well, I was doing a bit of pot that night. No, that was Woodstock. Yeah. No, that's the only drug. I got lucky because I got very good friends with Owsley. Owsley Stanley, the maker of LSD, Purple Haze, and all that, great chemist. And he said to me, "Roger, whatever you do, don't take chemicals. Ever take any chemical drugs." He said, "They will not agree with you." And I got on great with Owsley. And for some reason or the other, because he was so respected by everybody, Grateful Dead and all that, they worshipped Owsley. I listened to him. And he said, just smoke the pot, Rog, that will never hurt you. He said, you know, and here's a present. And he gave me this joint that was about this long. And it was wrapped in the Stars and Stripes. And then I said goodbye to him, and the next day we travelled down to Monterey, where all the others after the show dropped acid, dropped LSD, and were tripping, while I spent the night smoking this mentholated Stars and Stripes thing that Housley had given me. And it was wonderful. That's all I could say is, but I woke up in the morning and I was fresh as a daisy and straight. Yeah. The others were somewhere in outer space, kind of looking at everything like it was, you know, and I had to get them back to the UK, all the way from Monterey, through San Francisco airport to New York, because in those days you couldn't do it in one jump. And then get them through immigration in New York while they're all like this. Oh, God. You've got no idea what it was like to be on a plane with them. Pete spent his whole time looking at my caftan coat like this. But apparently, according to Pete, that's what led him to write I Can See for Miles. Yeah. He probably could. He looked like he could.
It also seems like it would be hard to conceive of Tommy if you didn't do that.
Yeah, no, you're right. But then, no, Tommy came from... What that did for him, that whole journey, it turned him off drugs, and he got into Maya Barber, into religion, and really deeply into it. And, you know, Pete never does anything by halves. His work ethic is extraordinary. And he got into Maya Barber and went completely anti-drug for a very long period of time, right up until after Keith Moon's death. So that was the most creative and the most joyous part of the Who as the originals with Keith in the band. That part of our lives was the most fantastic time.
And you talk about a press conference where you guys brought in all the music journalists to tell them about Tommy and play part of Tommy, and then you explained what the premise of it was. Can you tell that story about explaining what Tommy was to them?
Well, it wasn't, you know, it sounded ridiculous. We've written a rock opera, and it's about a deaf, dumb, and blind boy who plays a pinball machine, and you know, and of course they were all going, and they were just getting drunker and drunker in a tiny little club in the West End of London, and they all seemed very disinterested in the spiel. So we thought, well, let's get rid of that. Let's just play the music. And we went in and we played most of Tommy. We never did ever play Welcome in those days. It was far too gentle. And we flattened them, and they went out with their heads spinning. And the reviews that they gave us were incredible. So it just shows you can do all the talking in the world, but if you can play a good piece of music well, you'll move mountains. And
do you remember the first time you heard what the premise of it was?
Yeah, the premise was a very simple idea. What would life be like if all you experienced were vibrations? And I thought that was really interesting, because music is vibration. And this theme is carried through Pete's life in quite a few of his things, like Lifehouse, for instance. You know, that is the theory that if you ever find the true spark that sparked up the universe and the cosmos and all that, it will be a musical note. And that to me is like magical and infinite possibilities of what to write about. And it was the same thing with Tommy about, you know, what it would be like. So we slowly but surely pieced these songs together, and Pete would go home and write demos and bring them in 2 days later, have talks with Kit Lambert, who guided it. Kit Lambert was instrumental to the narrative of Tommy. he wrote a film script. It was very much like what appeared. Not, the film was different, but the stage play was very much similar to Kit Lambert's narrative of Tommy. And it was just a magical period where we were free to kind of rule our own lives creatively, unlike the music business today, which is kind of ruled by the accountants and the lawyers.
Well, you were taking gigantic creative swings.
Yeah.
And the Lifehouse project, did I say that correctly?
Yeah, Lifehouse.
But some people said that it was almost like he was envisioning, some version of the internet. How do you describe that? What that premise was?
Well, he had this idea of the grid rather than the web, and it was about the search for this note, the meaning of life, where everybody and it was incredibly futuristic. And it's almost like we're moving into Lifehouse at the moment, with virtual reality and all that stuff. And Pete had written about all these experience suits and things like this.
Where did he get that from? Was other people talking about that, or did he?
No other people weren't. But one of the problems we had with it, that instead of him just writing the music and just it being kind of whatever story you wanted in your head, he'd written this film script about this vibration. And Pete is not a film script writer, that's a different skill. So none of us could get our head around it. Yeah. And we'd have meeting after meeting after meeting, and they'd usually end up with us all very, very drunk, trying to understand it, and Pete getting very frustrated. But in the end, he had these fabulous songs. And the wonderful songs, which we experimented with. We did some live stuff at the Young Vic in London, where we play all afternoon with people just coming in off the street with no charge. We just thought, can we find this
wow
thing that Pete's looking for, And we did that. We did that for 2 or 3 weeks, and then decided, well, this music that we're playing now is interesting. Let's go out and do a few shows with it. And we did a few live shows with Won't Get Fooled Again. We were experimenting with the tape machine, putting all the synthesizers on and the Barbara O'Reilly, all that stuff. It went down incredibly well with audiences. We recorded some of it in New York with Kit Lambert. For some reason or the other, Pete came back, and there was something more going on behind the scenes, which I don't ever, I've never quite understood. I think it was more of a battle between Kit and Pete about the film idea. They wanted the album, he wanted the film, and I think that created friction, and that's why I think Pete came back and got Glyn, through the stuff we recorded in New York, out the window. And we started again with Glyn Johns. Yeah. So that's the only album we've really ever recorded where we had the songs quite a long time before we got in the studio.
Was that for him and the band considered a disappointment that you couldn't figure out how to put the whole thing together like Tommy? Because the album became, is that the biggest of all the albums?
No, Tommy is the biggest of the... Who's Next? It's a strange album. It's the kind of... Who's Next is it should have been a double album and never quite made it, even though people say, the songs that you didn't put on Who's Next, which should have been the second part of it, got wasted. They weren't really. I mean, Let's See Action, Pure and Easy, they're great songs, and they are where they are. I don't think it quite would have made a double album. I think Stronger as a single album. And, of course, individual songs on that album, Barbara O'Reilly, Won't Get Fooled Again, Behind Blue Eyes, they become kind of legendary, those songs, But as a piece, as a continual piece, it's not as strong. It's not as strong as either Tommy or Quadrophenia. I don't think anyway. But people, fans, all the usual lot down the front row. There, you know who you are. They'll argue with you, but they'll argue with you anyway, just for the hell of it.
And you were touring at this time, and you've told this story before about in the early days about Pete, his guitar smashing into the ceiling, and you say he seemed embarrassed as the reason why he started smashing the guitar.
Well, you'd have to ask him about that, but from my perspective, and it kind of over my left shoulder, that it was a kind of weird moment, but then it was an explosion of anger when it was a Rickenbacker as well. I mean, my heart was bleeding. I thought about all those hours it took me to make my first guitars, and there was this Rickenbacker being destroyed. I could have repaired it, Pete. It would have been all right. But the effect it had on the audience was extraordinary. And of course, Kit Lambert, who was then our manager, recognised it for being the key to us getting noticed. It was like how to write your name large on a wall and get people to see it.
Did they ever get bored of doing it?
Yes, we got very bored of doing it. I got more bored of the fact that no one ever wrote about the noise. I only ever wrote about the visual. Because the noise for me and the sound that they created, this whole auto-destructive art thing, the noise was the important thing. It was incredible. The guitar used to scream like an animal being sacrificed. It was sacrificial. It used to howl and scream. Moon's drums would thunder. Entwistle's bass would go at double, and feedback and all this stuff. And I used to do a thing with Keith's cymbals on the microphone and with my fingers like that with the microphone underneath it. So that would go, it was, the sound was just immense. Never once did they ever write about the sound. All they ever wrote about was they smashed their instruments. And I found that very dull.
Yeah, and it was expensive.
It was very expensive.
Because one recurring thing in the book that I was surprised by is in every chapter you talk about going on tour, they would break the guitars, they would trash the hotel rooms, you would every once in a while be arrested for stuff they did, and then you would come home and find out you lost money on the entire tour.
Yeah. No, it was really extraordinary because there's something about having a hit record that immediately all your friends overnight think you're a millionaire.
Yeah.
And that's because we'd had hit records for, 6 years, 1971. People thought we were millionaires. We didn't have any money.
Yeah.
We did a tour in 1971. We came home from it, and our accountant said, "You've done great this year. You've done really great. You started the year with a debt of £655,000. And he said, and now I'm happy to tell you it's down to 632,000. No, really. And you go, well, this is mad. At which point...
But it seems like you would be especially mad.
Well, it was really... The funny... this is how stupid it all was and how... Because it was such a large amount of money, because you've got to remember, that kind of money now would probably be $20 million. Of course, Keith Moon, hearing this news, immediately stripped bollock naked and laid his balls on the table.
What was that meant to signify?
I don't know.
What was his message?
I think it was his fuck you message to the accountant.
Yeah.
I'll leave this to say that his balls were upside down because he was standing on his head on the chair.
And at the same time, your managers were also stealing your money.
Well, I found that out later, and that was a very, very painful period for me, where I felt more isolated than ever, because I became isolated from Pete, You'd have to read the book. I can't talk too much about it.
I did read the book.
I'm going to take... Yeah, but if I tell them, then they're going to know the bloody book before they get home.
Do you want to talk about my career for a while?
Well, should we talk about your book?
We don't want to give away the whole book. No, but I'll tell you one thing off of this, which is I hosted the benefit for the Teen Cancer Trust.
Listen, let me say, guys, whoa, guys, you got this. Judd has been so generous to Teen Cancer America because you really have, I've been doing this thing for about 9 years in Pacific Palisades, and I did it initially to start an autism program at UCLA. Because the guy whose garden we hold it in had an autistic son, and he had this idea to stop, because autism is a really big problem. And he said, I said, I'll do a show, and it was the first year I'd had my solo band, and we did this little show in his garden, which is quite a big garden, by the way. It is a big garden, it's about 5 acres of Pacific Palisades. And that first year, I did a show for him. We raised about, I don't know, something like $500,000 to start this program at UCLA. But that was the same day that I got to meet the head of the hospital at UCLA through Rebecca Rothstein, my partner in founding Teen Cancer America. And I had a chat with him, and he totally understood the idea that I'd been trying to get through the door in the hospitals in America for the previous 15 years. And he promised me that he would send a team to England to investigate what we do in Britain. Which
is to create wings of hospitals that service teenagers with cancer, because there's usually not...
wings, I mean just wards.
Yeah.
Because it's, children have their nurseries and their teddy bears and their rainbows on the wall and their clowns and all that stuff. And adults have their lounges with TVs and all the things they want, their libraries. But what is there for adolescents and young adults in hospitals? There is absolutely nothing. So they tend to get very isolated. And to isolate a patient when they're going through some kind of trauma, like being told when you're 13, 14, 15, 16 years to 24 years old that you have cancer. You also have a very aggressive cancer, I'm afraid, because that's what they tend to get because of their age. And you're going to have to go through 6 months of chemo. You might lose your hair. Your hair's very important when you're a teenager, as I found out. So you can imagine the trauma that they have already had lumbered on them, and now to be isolated and maybe wake up, and every time they go out of their room, there's a little 2-year-old running past the door, screaming, kids next door, toys. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly damaging to their psyche. So this was a very simple idea, and David Feinberg sent the team over to England to see what we do, and they were all clinicians, these top clinicians from UCLA, and they went back to him and they said, we're way behind the ball, we've got to have it. And to his credit, he lived up to what he agreed to do. He gave us all the help he could to get our first space in a hospital in America at UCLA, and they will always hold the flag for that. It's not exactly what we want at the moment. It's small, very small. Space is at a premium. It will grow. It's a seed. Yeah. But equally, in 6 years, we are now at 17 hospitals throughout America. Yeah. Thank you. Listen, you guys have done it. We help out and do some fundraisers, but it's going to take you Americans to understand the vision of what we're trying to do here. Like the vision they had way back in 1802 when they realised that children aren't adults, and they started the first children's hospital. Well, this is what we should be in our point in history now. We cannot deny for much longer or any longer that adolescents and young adults are indeed socially and psychologically extremely different.
Yeah.
And we need to get them through that period in the best condition we can. So it's the big vision for the future.
And these shows are amazing.
We reckon in two years' time, if all goes well with what we have planned for fundraising things, a lot of people in the music business coming on board. And the reason that is because this is the age group that built the music business and support the music business as we know it today. They've given me the life of privilege that I've had. So this is a great way of giving back. You don't need to do that. But if all goes well, we reckon in 3 years we could be potentially working with upwards of sort of 70, 80 hospitals in America, all the way across the country. Wow. So we will get this done. I'm not going away from it. You know.
Well, the shows you put on are incredible. This year's show was Ed Sheeran and Van Morrison and Don McLean and Jewel. It was remarkable.
And me.
And you. and me.
And Judd paid an incredible amount of money in an auction to come up and sing My Generation. And I'm thinking, woo. Because I've got to tell you, I've done this several times. When it's raising money for charity, I'm completely unconditional. And if I have to make a fool of myself, I'm quite happy to do it. You know, it's charity. It really doesn't matter. So, and I've had some experiences singing My Generation when someone's bid to sing it with me. Anyway, Judd comes up, and I've got to tell you, he was fabulous. He can sing, he can do it. and he also tried to twirl the mic, which is kind of scary, because the one thing you learn when you're mic twirling is never let the lead go out in a kind of S like that. So you have no control over it whatsoever.
You almost were injured.
And Judd has a picture of himself with the mic above his head, and the lead is.
You look very.
And I'm looking very worried.
But in the book, you said that you feel lucky that you didn't ever hit John Entwistle with the microphone.
No, I don't know. Do I say that?
Yes, you do.
I think you're reading that into it. No. I've never hit any of the band ever.
But you said the mic sometimes flies into the crowd.
A few times it's the lead is broken. I take them on really well to make sure it can't come off from the plug. But there's 2 times it's actually the lead's broken. Yeah. And where the mic's gone, I wonder if it's come down yet. Because that thing, when it's spinning, that must be going probably 100 miles an hour. Sure.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, people are injured right now, somewhere.
Really? I'm going to wait for the lawsuits. Send them to him.
And now, in this period, you've been doing a bunch of tours in the last few years, big triumphant tours, and the Super Bowl, and the amazing performance on the 9/11 concert. What does it feel like in this era for you?
We're having the time of our lives, Pete and I. For the first time, for a long time, since Keith died, the band feels like it's doing the music in the right way. We're progressing. It can never be the same. We can never have the energy of our youth, but the music is still there, and that was what was always important to me, and I know that's what's always important to Pete, is, every time we play those songs, Keith and John are there with us. The noise they made in their life is still echoing, and every time we play the music, we ground it again. So they've never left me when I'm on stage. They're still there in my head. Yeah. They always will be.
Well, I saw the Quadrophenia show a few times, and it really was remarkable to see you do the entire album.
I love doing Quadrophenia. It's a tough one to sing. It is a tough one to sing for any singer. Most of the rock singers that get up and do Who songs, there's been a few tribute nights to the Who, where guest singers come up, and they all come up to me afterwards and say, "How do you do 2 hours of this?" They don't realise there's something about my voice that doesn't sound very high, but the songs are incredibly high. They're up in the high B's and the high C's, some of the notes. And, but I just love it. I just love Townshend's music. There's something about it. But I think he's one of the most important rock composers or any popular music composers of the 20th century. In my opinion, he is, every bit should be up there with the Lennon McCartneys, if not as popular, but in the quality of his music, in some ways, kind of unique, and it's a kind of new classical. He writes in a classical manner. There's something else going on in Pete's songs that is nowhere else out there.
Well, I mean, as a teenager, Quadrophenia was, the kind of album that got you through that period of your life. Listening to songs like "I'm the One," which were used in Freaks and Geeks for a sequence, and I've talked to Eddie Vedder about it. Like, that was the record where we felt like somebody understood what was happening.
Well, that was again Townshend's genius. Pete's genius is that, and it still happens today. The audience, when we play Quadrophenia, goes from 8 years old to 80, and it speaks for every generation going through. That is pure and utter genius.
And how was it doing the Super Bowl?
Oh, I hated it.
Is it terrifying to...
No, it's not terrifying. You're completely out of control of anything, And the dressing room smells of jockstrap. As you probably know.
Of course.
And
they put the stage together in like 8 minutes.
And the stage has to be set up. And of course, just in case any of the wires break, you have to do a recording of it in case they lose transmission to the stage, because everything's done so quickly. Yeah. So they have to be sure that they get something. So you have to do a recording of it first, and you also have to sing it and do it live. But you never quite know what one they're using. So it's the most confusing, and you think, why? But it is a big honour, and I understand that. But who aren't really up for medleys? I did my best with putting that piece together. It was left to me to do it, and I thought it gave an indication of the kind of stuff that we've done through our whole career. Although I don't like medleys generally. Yeah, it was a good medley. I think it flowed as a single piece.
Yeah. And how about the 9/11 concert? Because that really was a remarkable performance.
Was remarkable. That was a tough cookie, just emotionally for everybody. I mean, that whole time for the Western world, surely, it was traumatic, wonderful, but sad. Everything, all your emotions were amplified 1,000, maybe 1,000,000 times. Yeah. And to look out at that sea of blue uniforms, I'll never forget it. Never forget it. It was hard. It was hard. Behind Blue Eyes was the one that hit me, because Behind Blue Eyes was a day of loss for me when I first sang it, because it was the day I lost my first pet, my first dog, which was a pointer, and she had blue eyes, and her name was Nellie. She got run over. And I went into the studio that night and I sang Behind Blue Eyes. And I kind of thought of Nellie. It doesn't sound much. but equally, both Pete and I have the same colour blue eyes, so it's kind of, there's something about that. To sing it that night to that audience with this sea of blue. And I have to tell you that in some of the seats right in front of the stage were some of the children of some of the guys that never made it out. And they were wearing their dad's helmets, the fire helmets with their names on. Whoa, that just wanted to make you go to jelly, to see that.
Did it make you think about your town that you grew up in and that period of your childhood?
Not really, no, it didn't, no. I mean, the whole of New York was so traumatising, the whole of America was. Well, the whole of like I say, the whole of the Western world was. But we remember in Britain, we were just like, gobsmacked by it all, and it was horrendous and horrible time.
We have some photographs.
Hopefully our humanity gets through this horrible period in our history.
We have some photographs that we wanted to show. They're all of me.
That's the house I was born in. It didn't look like that.
Yeah, it looks pretty good.
No, I know, that looks all posh now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's all very posh.
You should have held on to it. You could have made
Well,
a
I
lot
mean,
of money.
but when I lived in it, we didn't have paint like that. It was all kind of dirty brown and black. And the windows had just been replaced and some of the roof put back on from the bombing. But we lived in the upstairs part of that house. And my auntie and my 3 cousins, I lived in that house with 5 women. 5 young women, and my mother and my auntie and my uncle. So needless to say, I learned to keep my legs crossed.
Let's go to the next one.
Huh?
We're going to go to the next.
Yeah, that's me and the missus. I'm starting to like her. We've been together now 51 years. And I've got to tell you, it takes an extraordinary woman to accept someone who's working in our business. And because you've got to remember, when I met Heather, I was, 1967, so I've been 23 years old. I mean, our career was climbing. And we were all hippies, but Heather had been in show business. She understood the business we were in. She understood the trials and tribulations of being on the road. And I just said to her, that it's never going to be a conventional marriage. But if you want to, we wanted to have children. And I said, well, I'll marry you, but let's not let any of that other stuff that usually breaks marriages up get in the way about us. And it never did. But it takes an extraordinary woman to do that. But but the great thing is, we are true partners in everything we do. I can't understand these people, especially the rich ones, who fight over, dollars and pounds, when they should just say, well, take it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's not about that.
Well,
I don't get it.
That's a rare thing to have somebody understand certain aspects of the rock and roll lifestyle. I can't say my wife would go for it.
Yeah, but if you sort it, you have to sort it out at the beginning. You can't sort it out halfway through.
What if I tried?
But you're too late.
Yeah, because she's always mad at me. For much less than that, I mean, we were watching The Crown, and we watched 2 episodes, and then she went out, and I watched 2 without her, and we almost got divorced about that.
Well, you see, I would never do that.
Yeah.
You see, I'd wait until the wife came back, and then we'd watch them together.
Yes. Well, I'm an inconsiderate person.
So, it depends what's important. And like I say, I was a very young man in one of the biggest rock bands in the world, and we were sometimes away for 2 or 3 months on the road. I'm going to come back and honestly say, yes, darling, I've been a good boy. Yeah. She wouldn't have believed one word that was coming out of my mouth. So, but it's something you have to straighten out at the beginning, and she accepted it for that. We've got wonderful children, and they're all fabulous. They're good people. And I'm very proud of my family. I'm very proud that we're still together. It means so much to me.
We're going to look at this next photograph.
That's my mates from Shepherd's Bush. And they were, although this is in the 70s, they were the kind of root of the 100 Faces mods that we put together to go out and give out tickets to get the marquee filled up. And on the where you're sitting, the left-hand side there at the front, that's a guy called Ian Moody, who I think we got to play the washboard in our skiffle group because Ian was just so cool looking, we just had to have him in the band. The guy with the broken arm at the back was someone who got caught robbing a bank. Sadly, most of these guys are dead. There's Tommy Shelley there. I can't see. And there's Irish Jack, of course, and probably a lot of the Who fans, dedicated Who fans. Irish Jack had a lot to do with Quadrophenia, with the story of Quadrophenia and Pete. And he's down there, I think, is he right, kind of in the middle? Yes, the little one in the middle. And he's very Irish, and he lives in Cork, in Southern Ireland. Used to be a postman, now retired, but wonderful, wonderful character. And we're still friends. Yeah, that's good memories. And that's outside the front door of the Gold Hawk Club where we used to play.
Wow.
And that's in, I think that's 1974.
Let's go to the next one there.
That's me with my young son, Jamie, where we're building some lakes. That was my first toy bulldozer that I had. And I was teaching Jamie to drive it. Boy, the kids love bulldozers. Wow.
That's every kid's dream.
I'll tell you what, man, you've got to get one. You can have so much fun with one of them.
That's how you know your dad's a rock star, when you got your own bulldozer. Let's go to the next one.
Yeah, that's her, Madge. She's terrific. Let me tell you, if I was a woman and I needed a woman to look up to, that one is incredible. She's absolutely adorable. And it's a shit job and someone has to do it. Everybody thinks it's glamorous and all that. This woman is extraordinary. What is she now, 90-something? She's on her feet all day. She does so much work. And she's smart. She's got the most beautiful smile. And she's very witty and very funny and very, very gracious. When that photo, I'm saying to her, I'm sorry, ma'am, but you'll have to speak up. I'm in a rock band. And she roared. She was wonderful. She roared, absolutely roared. And that's at the Albert Hall, the Teenage Cancer Trust shows. Right behind me, and the woman in the middle, that's Adrian and Myrna Whiteson, who are the founders of the Teenage Cancer Trust in Britain. That's my doctor and his wife.
All right. So you built this...
That's one of the lakes I built.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I built it. Who gives... and it's got nothing to do with catching fish. It's just to do with having a good time. And I used to... My mates from Shepherd's Bush used to come down there, and they'd share the fishing with me, and they made me feel very guilty that I had all this to myself. And they used to say, well, you can't have this all to yourself, Roger. What about us guys in the projects in London, you know? We deserve places like this to come to. So I opened it up to the public and became very famous for trout. And what I've discovered in life is that everybody cares about everything. They care about the pandas, the seals. Nobody gives a fuck about the fish. And you know what? Without the fish, we are truly screwed.
All right.
Think about it. Oh, what's this?
Is that the Rock and Roll Circus? Or what?
Yeah, that's the rock and roll, the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. That's the last time I saw Brian Jones. Dear Brian, I was very good friends with Brian. He was a lovely, lovely man, Brian Jones. Sadly, became a very, very bad drug addict, and he was spacing out on, I think he was heroin. Bad, very bad.
Is it true that the Rolling Stones didn't release it because they didn't think their performance was as good as your performance?
Well, I've only heard this as, you know, on the grapevine. I don't know whether that's true. I thought the Rolling Stones were great.
Yeah.
I really don't know the truth of that story, and I don't really care. Yeah. It was never a competition for me.
Yeah. Well, because you won it.
Are you sucking up?
Always sucking up. Okay, the next one.
Ah.
Yeah. Is that Tommy or?
That's Tommy. That's Tommy, freezing my nuts off on top of a mountain somewhere.
Now, one weird story in your book is that there's a sequence where you're hang gliding in the movie, and you say they just taught you how to do it like 15 minutes before, and then send you off a cliff.
Oh. That's true. And this was the early days of hang gliders, where they were almost built out of scaffolding poles with a piece of canvas. And instead of the laying down cocoon that they now use, you sat on a swing.
Yeah.
And they just said, well, we'll take you just up the hill a little bit, and we'll run you down, and you push the front out, and you kind of swing it that way to go right, and you swing it that way to go left. But make sure you don't stall. I said, what do you mean, stall? I said, well, you make sure you keep pushing the front out, because if you lose too much speed, you'll come down like a stone. And when as you're coming down, you have to kind of adjust the thing backwards and forwards, this A-frame in front of you. So I go up the hill and run down. I'm only about sort of 20 foot up this hill, and the thing takes off, and I'm about 5 foot off the ground. Bang, straight into a gorse bush. But the guy then said, well, I've noticed by that, and literally I'd only gone probably 30 yards, not probably, well, it may be a bit further, but it didn't feel like very long in the air. And I was just desperately trying not to do this thing called stall. Anyway, so he said, I can see by the way you handled it that you obviously know, is this getting lost? You obviously know what you're doing. I thought,
that's how they get you with that lie.
This is what you call acting.
I can tell by the way you hit that bush, you know what you're doing.
So anyway, so he said, we'll go a bit further up the hill. So we literally only walked about another 20 yards up this very steep hill on the Marlborough Downs with the wind blowing towards it. And I run down, do the same thing, and I'm expecting to go, just a little bit higher. The next thing I know, I've caught an updraft, and I'm 300 foot in the air. What did he say about stalling? But I managed to get the thing down, and that was it. That was my lesson in hang gliding. And the next thing I know, Ken Russell's going, we're going for a take, which meant that when I was learning, they'd given me a crash helmet, although I don't know what good this crash helmet was ever going to do if I'd stalled from 300 feet. They took the crash helmet away. I had to take my shirt off, I had to take my shoes off. All I had was that outfit there. Yeah. This was towards the end of October in England. I'm not kidding you, it was freezing. I get to the top of this hill, which was probably about 500 feet. And I get to the top where there are another series of hang gliders, all doing it seriously, all kind of professional guys. So I arrive at the top, called half naked, and they're all looking at me. They can't see the film crew down the bottom. So they were kind of puzzled, and they're all shaking their heads as I run off the edge of this and start singing. And that's a true story, honest, a true story. And of course, Ken Russell would always make you go again. Yeah. He would always say, haven't quite got it. But I loved Ken Russell. He was a genius director. And to have worked for him was one of the joys of my life. It really was.
Well, you talk in the book also about when you had meningitis, and you looked back on your life, and you were happy with it.
Well, you could hardly be sad with it, could you? I mean, from when I got kicked out of school to where I was laying in that hospital bed, really did think I was going to die. I mean, I couldn't find out what was wrong with me. I was getting worse and worse and worse. I had tubes coming out of everywhere. The pain was horrendous. And I just thought about my life, and I was in wonder of where it's taken me and what I've done and how lucky I've been with my family, all the things that I've achieved. And I just thought, you know, Rog, it doesn't matter if there's no more. Because I was calling people up saying goodbye. I mean, the only thing I could kind of work was a finger to kind of push a Skype button. And I really didn't think I'd make it. And so I laid there and I thought about it. It doesn't matter, Rog. You know, this is great. It's all right. You don't leave anyone in trouble. Let go. And I don't know whether they'd given me a drug or what, but an incredible peace came over me, a calm like I can't describe. And there were no lights at the end of tunnels. There was none of that. But my brain, I did have a thought that why fear? Why fear, Rog? Why fear? And I thought about how everybody views life as an exit. And I thought, well, if you're on the other side of that door, Rog, it's an entrance. So now, every time I meet anyone that's trying to feel they're on their way there, I say, head for the entrance. Because that's a positive movement, whereas an exit is a kind of negative.
Well, I'd like to say, I'm sure for everybody here, I really feel like your music changed my life. I've spent thousands of hours of pure happiness and inspiration from your work, and it was an honor to get to talk to you tonight. And the book is really incredible. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Roger.
Yes, thank you, Lieutenant. Thank you so much. Are we not going to have any questions now?
I think we did it all.
We did it all. If you've got any questions,
for next time,
send them to Judd.
Thank
you so much for coming. Guys, I really do. Thank you so much. All I can say is, with this, look at this. Look what it's come to. Oh my God. Not quite Woodstock, is it? All I can say is I really hope you enjoy the book. I've tried to be as honest as I can. It is honest. There are moments in my life where I've done things that I haven't regretted anything, but there's things I've done that I haven't been proud of particularly, which I own up about. I don't regret them because you can't change your past. You have to live with the future, and by making the mistakes in the past very early on in my life, it's what brought me into being the man I am today, and I've got to tell you that everybody gives us these great accolades and everything else, but we haven't done it alone. We're a communal band. We're part of a society, and that is, you know, very much a society of us and our audience. We haven't done it alone. We have done it with your support, and I really do appreciate that. Thanks so much. And thank you, Judd. You're welcome.